welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am here with the author of a gorgeous little volume of poetry. I read it twice for this interview, that's why I love reading poetry, because you can sort of experience it many times when I'm prepping for an interview. And I'm so excited to talk about it. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Maria Giesbrecht. I'm a poet from Canada. I live just outside of Toronto with my fiance and our tuxedo kitten named Mozzie. And I've been writing poetry for, I want to say as long as I can remember, but truly fell in love with the craft of it in high school when one of my creative writing teachers helped me sort of realize that this could be a thing beyond just an assignment, which is a rare gift, I think, in teachers to awaken that in students. This is my debut traditionally published poetry collection, A Little Feral, and I've been asked what it's about so many times, and I think I've distilled it to my reckoning with what holiness is and how I wrestle with and grapple and find holiness in a world that has changed very much for me because I grew up in a Mennonite family, so very religious and traditional values. And as I found my way in the world as a writer and just as a person, how I view holiness has very much changed. So the book is kind of like the journey of that whole adventure.
That's a lovely way to describe it. It's a really beautiful, not just emotional arc, which I'm always, really impressed that you can do with a volume of poetry, sort of have an arc over the course of the book. And it's sort of an intellectual sort of grappling with this idea of what is faith, what is God, what is my relationship to all these things. My first question before we get to the volume itself is to ask just a little bit more about your journey in poetry. I'm particularly interested in Gather, the community of writers that you have created, and how that has influenced, your journey as an artist.
Yeah, I think I did things a little upside down compared to most poets. I started by, I didn't know anything about traditional publication or literary journal. So I just did what I knew, which was, I'm a young writer, so I knew Instagram. And I started posting some of my poems on Instagram. And first, of course, blocking all my coworkers. And I started discovering that there were other writers online that I really resonated with, and there were people in real life that were my age that were writing poetry. And so that's how Gather really began, was just meeting people online, because in real life I knew very few poets. And through that, I feel like we all went on a journey together to find a more traditional route to publication. So I started submitting my work to literary journals and magazines, and then through that found my publisher. But I think it usually happens the other way around. Folks will go to graduate school, get their MFA, get all of the traditional publications out first, and then maybe they send a little screenshot to their Instagram. So I did it a little backwards, but I'm very grateful because that allowed me to find my people very early on. And I think when you're a writer, you don't know a lot of people in real life who are doing the same thing you are, or at least I didn't. So it was really amazing to be able to hop on a Zoom call once a week and talk about what we were writing about that week. We would write together. We still do. We're on pause right now for summer, but come September, we'll begin again. And we meet once a week. We write together, we share our work together. We have little publishing accountability groups for folks that are wanting to get their books published. Because the reality is there's so much information that is gatekept in this industry. And I think there's so much power when the writers come together and they share their knowledge. And that's how I credit all of my journey and my, I guess, quote unquote success. That sounds strange to say, but because of other people, other people that told me, hey, you could submit here. Hey, you should query this agent. You don't know what you don't know until you know it, So Yeah, community. It's like it's the reason I'm a poet, really. It truly is. I'm also very extroverted, so I just really like being around people and I don't want to do this thing alone.
That's so nice, because something I think about all the time is like part of being an artist or particularly a writer is very isolating, where you are just sort of like alone with your thoughts and your creativity and trying to put words on the page or in the document or whatever it is. But then there is like a super public side too, like when you do have the book deal and then you are, helping to market your book and get it out there and network and all those kind of things. So it's nice that I think those things can kind of like complement each other, like when the work gets too isolating, you can like go to your community and
Totally.
then you can like retreat to your work when things get hectic.
Yeah, totally. It's like a dance, a balancing act.
Yeah, that's lovely. So when in your process, did you know that it was time for a collection?
I think I overwrite, so I write a lot more than I need, and then I tried to pare it down to what was coming up. So a lot of folks get a great idea for a book and then they write towards that idea. I am very jealous of people who can do that, but I cannot do that. So I have written these poems over the last, I think the oldest one is probably older than 5 years, maybe even older than that. Um, and I probably had about 150 poems that I printed all out for me or for myself. And I went to a little Airbnb in the town next to mine. And I just spent a few days in silence with all of the poems. And I tried to ask the poems what they wanted to say and what was coming up and what were the themes. And so from that, I found what my poetry has been saying all along. And so it was less of like a decision and more of like an asking or like a questioning. I think maybe I knew I wanted to create a collection of poems when I realized I have a lot of poems and I was like, I think they would really like a home, like a place to just rest, a resting place.
What is that process like? Like that's fascinating to me, like just living quite physically and literally like with your work for a few days in intimacy and isolation. When you were narrowing down the poems, we know the theme of the book and what it ended up to be, but was there a point at which sort of that theme emerged to you or you found it in the work? And then did realizing that change or shape how you then viewed your art? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. That's such a good question. I'm trying to remember what the feeling was like for me. I think I realized that I had a lot of poems in my book, or in the booklet of all of those printed out poems that were right, but not right now. So like, I think there will be another collection in the future that has a lot of love poems, for example. There are only a very few, like, there are very few love poems in A Little Feral. Although I suppose you can really interpret most poems to be love poems if you get if you get kind of esoteric about it. It was like a poem was ready, it was complete. I love the poem, but it just didn't have a place in this particular project. And how I viewed my work, I think as a result was with a lens of abundance. It made me realize that I'm capable of writing great poems and I will be capable of writing great poems in the future, and that just because it didn't end up in this book, it could end up in a future one. Yeah, and it when you're spending so much time with your own work, I think it does. It's pretty good for the soul to like feel a little bit like proud of yourself. Like, wow, I have done all of this. I have written all of this, and now the hard part is over. It's just like curating these into what it wants to become.
Nice. Yeah, it sounds a little bit like assembling a playlist too, like there are like conscious ideas, that kind of drive what you're doing, but there's also just a little bit of like, fuzzy magic to it too.
Totally. Yeah, just vibes.
Yeah. So I'm really curious for you, like where a poem usually starts. It could be different every time, I imagine, but is it a feeling or an image? Is it like a turn of phrase that gets stuck in your head?
Hmm. Often the first thing that I write down for a poem doesn't actually make it into the poem. One of my favorite poets, Megan Falley, talks about the runway, and we often need a runway as poets to write our way into a poem. So like I think the first lines that I usually write down in the day are kind of not that great. So they end up being cut off at the end. But one of my favorite ways to feel like something before I write is to just read other really great poetry. So I usually start by reading some of my favorite poets, their collections, or if I'm at a cafe, I will always have a book of poetry on me and I just flip to a page. Maybe it's like a color that I see on the page that I really like, or one word that really inspires me, and then that sends me down a whole list of or train of thought. I will say recently I've started looking at some surreal artwork online. I know it sounds kind of strange, but I love like classic surrealism, and it does something for my poetry. I think it activates kind of similar parts of my brain because it's these abstract associations and it's all up for interpretation. So yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag depending on the morning.
I love the comparison to surrealist art. I am by no means like a poetry expert, and so I don't know that I'm going to use the correct terminology. But like in both surreal art and poetry, there's often like this feeling that like you're getting at the truth by talking around something, by not naming it, but by saying
Totally.
all the things sort of like around it.
Yeah, for sure. We're masters at beating around the bush.
When you are then writing a poem, um, especially when you are processing like your own life and experiences, as you often are in this one, is there a drive beyond the expression? Like, are you also sort of like thinking through something or feeling through it? I'm really curious about like how producing this book sort of like if you gained any insights into your life.
Absolutely. I'm not a huge fan of the idea that poetry can heal us. I think there are like much better avenues for healing than poetry, because it's just so unreliable. But I will say there is something that happens, I think, when you write through your own experience. And I forget who it is. It's maybe Brene Brown. She talks about, or maybe it's Elizabeth Gilbert. She talks about writing from the scar, not from the wound. A lot of the things that I'm writing about have happened 10, 15 years ago. And I've thankfully gone through a lot of, like a lot of therapy around those traumas. So I'm writing less from like a very tender place and more from like outside introspective place. And I think that's actually pretty important for a poet because you get to write about the truth but not make like a museum of your trauma, or I'm not inviting people to like go into my book and my life is now a museum for you to peruse at. It's more like a carefully curated pieces of artwork that have some truth and some fiction, and and it's awesome and exciting to me that poetry is that vehicle that lets us do that. Like the poetry doesn't have to be it has to be honest, but like not honest from the facts of the truth, but more in like service and in reverence to the truth of the beauty of the artwork, I think.
That is lovely. That's really beautiful. Yeah, because I've always kind of bounced off this idea. I mean, I obviously espoused it as a teenager, in my day, that like you can use poetry or art to like make your pain beautiful or aesthetic or something like that. Because I don't know that that's always like the art that I enjoy doesn't really do that with pain all the time,
Yeah,
you know. But I do like that idea of poetry as a lens that you could just kind of put on to like to view
totally.
yourself through and sort of see what comes up.
Yeah, yeah, I love that idea as the lens. Totally.
So we haven't talked about any particular poems yet, and I think my way into that will be with the title poem. I'm very curious about like what goes into the choice of like the title, why that poem is the one that sort of is it because it encapsulates it for you, or is it just a sort of phrase that is really appealing to you? So yeah, can you talk about that poem, I guess, and sort of like the relationship to the volume, I guess, a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So this poem I wrote, it's got to be over a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, and it has two parts to it. So I often write in the mornings, and sometimes it's like well past 11 a.m. before I change out of my pajamas. And my partner used to come into my office, and he still does, and he says like, Maria, you're looking a little feral right now. And he means it, he meant it with love, of course. But one day we were going for a walk in our neighborhood and we noticed that somebody had a bumper sticker that said a little feral. And I was like, oh, okay, I feel so called out. But also, it inspired me to write the poem. And I wrote about all of the ways in which like I am intentionally and boldly messy with myself and my existence in this world. And especially the end of that poem is in relationship to God and my relationship with God. And growing up, I always was told you have to make a choice. You are a believer or you are not a believer. And as I'm growing up and older, I'm realizing that a lot of my life is in the liminal, in between the uncertainty, like the shakiness, the fluidity. And same goes for my spirituality or my relationship with holiness. And so I wanted to capture that like messy sort of like imperfectness and an acceptance of myself like that. And so actually this poem was totally supposed to be in the collection, but we were going to title the entire book something different. And then before I knew anything about SEO stuff, and like the publisher was like, maybe we shouldn't name it that for SEO purposes. And so we pivoted and the title became A Little Feral. And I'm really glad because I love the title now. It's like it's my favorite. But yeah, it's been a bit of a journey. So many different like layered meanings for A Little Feral.
That is so interesting. And I did really love that poem. I love in general throughout the volume how the poems sort of like deal with both identity, but with childhood too.
Mm,
And it made me think a lot about like why I think poetry is so good at capturing those moments, you know?
mm,
Um, I'm gonna float like a theory I literally just came up with by you. But like most childhood memories aren't like narratives, you know, they're like snapshots. They're
mm,
like moments. And so poetry is like really well suited, I think, to sort of capturing like something that's not a coherent or narrative memory, but like the feeling of an image, you know?
hmm. Yeah, I resonate with that so much. And I think what we're trying to do as poets is we're trying to take those very minute moments and stretch them out and like expand upon them and pluck things from them and like extrapolate and in a way that makes our life bigger and longer than it would be without that because we get to literally expand time with a poem. Like it's magic.
Is there a poem in the volume that was like the hardest one or the biggest struggle?
Yeah, it was one that really debated whether I would include it or not, and it's pretty early on the book. It's called My Father, a Horse Whisperer, and it was originally published by Queen's Quarterly in Canada. And when it was published, it was very scary for me to have it out there. And I don't think I ever shared that one on my social media because it's very personal. But I really wanted my poetry collection to be as honest as possible, and so I did the scary thing and included it. But it's been very well received, and I've had so many lovely messages from other folks who have gone through similar things. So it feels right. But yeah, that one was really hard.
Yeah, it definitely resonated with me, and it's the one that made me cry. The first one that made me cry.
Oh, oh, my heart.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a lovely volume. And I guess my last question about the book itself before we turn to the future is about the cover. I love it. Wondered like what is your role in the process and sort of how you arrived at that?
Yeah. So like most publishers, the art or the author doesn't have a whole lot of control over the cover. I was able to send in kind of a mood board for what I was thinking, and I was really going for the idea of something wild in a domestic setting. So the book is like all of these white birds, because there's a poem in my book called White Birds. Um, and all of these white birds in a living room. And it just I just wanted to capture like the contrast between those two things and how out of place they were. And so then Bright Bloody, they commissioned the artwork from Jess Graham, and then Derek Brown, he did the final like topography and everything. And so yeah, I didn't have like a whole lot to say in the process, but I really love it, and I'm so grateful that they were able to capture the vision that I had.
Ooh, what was your mood board like? That's like a sounds like a very fun a crafty way to kind of process your book too.
Yeah, it was fun. I had these like color schemes going, and then the colors are very kind of like retro almost, like the teal blue. And one of my favorite colors is pink, so of course we had to have some pink on there. And yeah, I just wanted like a kind of a bit of a shocking cover, but still beautiful. And I think we landed on that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gorgeous. So, so what is next for you? You're probably, I imagine, constantly writing poetry, but are there more books in your future?
Yes. So I'm working on two projects at the moment, another poetry collection about women's labor. So I'm really interested in talking about there's a bit of that in A Little Feral, but I grew up working on like agricultural farms, and the garlic field was a big one for my family growing up. So I'm really interested in talking about like women's labor in general and how labor shapes us, how labor moves us, how it sustains us, and also how it can like crush us. And so that's the poetry thing I'm working on. And then very, very early stages, but I'm also working on a short story collection about a little girl named Chrissy. So yeah.
Well, those both sound very exciting, and I look forward to them too. Thank you
Thank you.
for taking the time to talk to us. I'm so excited to share this at our library.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun to chat with you.
Thanks. Listeners, please check out A Little Feral. It's an absolutely gorgeous volume of poetry, and it's something I think that you can revisit several times and sort of get something new out of every time. It's a very rich little volume. Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.